Horror movie remakes are a part of life, but sometimes the original is so perfect, a remake is wholly unnecessary. More than that, there are some horror films that should be declared off-limits with no remakes allowed. These perfect horror movies should never be remade. In 1979, director Ridley Scott, writer Dan O'Bannon, designer H.R. Giger, and a young, unknown actor named Sigourney Weaver teamed up to bring us the scariest thing in space since we discovered it's an endless, yawning black void. Alien was an instant hit, freaking out audiences and catapulting Weaver into instant fame. The beautiful sets, terrifying creature design, and non-stop tension made it a standout in a sci-fi market still clogged with rip-offs of 1977's Star Wars. Immediately, knockoffs of Alien came out of the woodwork as well, but none could touch the original. The budget of these would-be cash-ins were often very tiny, the creature designs were almost always laughably bad, and they simply weren't scary. Alien stood alone in the cat-and-mouse extraterrestrial horror genre. 7 years later, we got a sequel, Aliens. The film eschewed the horror of its predecessor and focused more on action. While an outstanding film in its own right, Aliens and its follow-ups have never gone back to the horror of the original. The closest we've gotten is 2014's Alien Isolation, a video game starring Ripley's adult daughter, which continued the original film's legacy of inhuman predatory horror. In 1999, no one had even heard of viral marketing yet. Then reports about 3 college-aged filmmakers who went missing in 1994 popped up everywhere. They were making a documentary on a local legend, the Blair Witch, and never came home. They had filmed everything, though, and that found footage was being cut together into a theatrical release called The Blair Witch Project.
I am so sorry for everything that has happened.
Since making up stuff on the internet was still pretty new, people saw no reason to doubt it, and the Blair Witch Project became a sensation. While it didn't invent found footage, it was certainly the biggest at the time, and its premise seemed creepily plausible. Lots of people go missing in the woods all the time. And so, the newness of online media and the growth of homemade video in the 90s combined into something no one had ever seen before and would lay the groundwork for much of the media we consume now, decades later. Because of the nature of technology and its non-stop forward march, the Blair Witch Project simply can't be remade. It was a touchstone in time. Other found footage horror movies have come and gone, and there was even an attempt at a soft reboot in the form of a sequel, but none of these can recapture the exact cultural zeitgeist that made the Blair Witch Project more than just a movie about college students in some creepy woods. In 2005, before Rob Zombie had solidified himself as a filmmaker and was still mainly known for his musical career, he released The Devil's Rejects, a spree killer road trip movie about a trio on the run from the law. It was dark and gritty before those were buzzwords, evoking a lo-fi 1970s horror vibe. His music videos, and his film debut, House of a Thousand Corpses, all had a retro horror grindhouse feel that laid the groundwork for The Devil's Rejects. And Zombie's fingerprints are all over it. It's his greatest film, or only good film, depending on who you ask, because it is the culmination of Zombie's artistic output. The cast performances absolutely make this movie. In keeping with 1970s serial killer thriller tradition, the plot is relatively simple. But the chemistry between Sid Haig, Bill Moseley, and Sherry Moon Zombie is irreplaceable. If someone ever foolishly tried to remake The Devil's Rejects, they'd likely find they have only 2 possible outcomes: make a worse version of the original, or create a redundant and identical version to what we already got in 2005. In the 90s, director Paul W.S. Anderson already had a reputation for directing schlock, such as the Mortal Kombat feature film, and would later bring us cheese fests like Alien vs. Predator and the Resident Evil films. But tucked in between those 2 eras of goofy video game adaptations was a particularly great gem, 1997's Event Horizon, a space-bound horror film that manages to not be a cheap imitation of Alien. Event Horizon features a rescue crew searching for survivors of the titular ship, which had a unique engine that traveled by creating holes in space-time. As the crew and the ship's designer, Dr. Weir, investigate, it becomes clear the Event Horizon's wormholes actually cut straight through hell itself.
She's been to a place you couldn't possibly imagine. And now, it is time to go back.
It's a great premise, which is exactly why it's the kind of thing that can be only done once. Any remake attempts would just be revisiting the same thing we've already seen. In fact, fans of the film really just want one thing: over a half hour of cut footage purportedly even more horrific than what was shown on screen, but was lost after editing. A TV adaptation is in the works, but in fairness, that's not quite a remake. The 1973 release of The Exorcist marked the dawn of the horror blockbuster. The film's claim of being based on true events made it all the more terrifying, and the story of a little girl possessed by a demonic force quickly became one of the most popular hits of the 1970s and firmly inserted itself into pop culture. The slow burn movie, dripping with an ominous sense of dread, pitted the horrors of the occult against a priest doubting his own faith and his feeling of relevance slipping in 1970s America. While the film has had a number of sequels and prequels of mixed quality, as well as a television series that's honestly better than you'd expect, thankfully, no one has tried to remake The Exorcist. The other films in the series struggle to muster scares and storytelling as good as the original, with 1990's The Exorcist 3 coming closest, but even that one took many years for audiences to appreciate. While a remake of The Exorcist is probably inevitable, it seems like such a thing would be unnecessary. The original still holds up fantastically against other horror films, and it pioneered a lot of the genre tropes movies in the decades since have relied on. The premise has been retread numerous times by unrelated exorcism films, but it's never quite as interesting or scary as creepy old Pazuzu. Comedic heavy hitter Jordan Peele, of Key & Peele and Mad TV fame, was already poised to be a big name when he released a trailer for a horror film called Get Out. While Peele had never made his love of horror a secret, people were baffled that he would make such a serious, scary movie. Initially, rumors alleged the whole thing was a joke, and the film was actually a comedy the trailer made appear horrific. Upon its release in 2017, though, Get Out proved that entirely untrue.
Oh, no. 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 No, 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 no.
While social commentary has always had a big hand in horror, from George Romero's Living Dead films to The Purge, Get Out's story of normal black people being exploited and transformed by what appears to be a community of well-meaning rich white folks isn't just highly suspenseful, but downright chilling. Alongside still lingering racial tensions in America, Get Out is a big, flashing warning sign for the late 2010s reading, "Be careful who you trust." While it's too soon to say similar social tensions might or might not be a thing in the future, a remake of Get Out pretty much never needs to happen. The film is a perfect encapsulation of the aftermath of America's first black president. Coming-of-age horror can really shine because, after all, what's scarier than growing up? Nowhere is this more evident than David Robert Mitchell's 2014 film It Follows. A monster invisible to all but those who've been with someone else can see it doggedly pursues its victims, but only at a walking pace.
It could look like someone you know, or it could be a stranger in a crowd. Whatever helps it get close to you.
Regardless, it will catch up to them eventually if they stay still for too long. What's especially intriguing about the film is its feeling of timelessness. The cars are older, the stuff on TV is older, but the movie's Detroit setting is clearly after the city fell on tough times in the latter part of the 20th century. While it's a cool creative choice, it also makes the film resistant to remakes, since it already feels like it could have been set in basically any time period. It Follows themes are distinctly early 21st century, like the sense of isolation lead character Jay feels from everyone else once the monster fixates on her, and the quiet of the mostly empty, rundown city. Intimacy plays a big part in this too, as the ability to see the monster is only passed on through intercourse, but its physical touch is becoming less common in our modern lives. Stanley Kubrick is one of the most notorious auteur filmmakers in cinema history, and as such, any of his films will naturally have some protection against the dreaded remake plague. Who really wants to mess with a guy whose fans are so wildly devoted there's an entire documentary just about their bizarre theories? And before you say, wait a second, there was already a remake of The Shining, was there really? The 1997 TV miniseries is also based on Stephen King's novel, but it's far closer to the novel than Kubrick's version, which had quite a few differences setting it apart. King himself might not have liked Kubrick's changes, but critics and audiences did, and it's regarded as one of the scariest horror movies, period.
Come play with us, Daddy.
This is one of the few instances where a remake isn't just unnecessary, but completely illogical. Every piece of the original film supports another piece. If one thing was off, it could probably still hold together, but it wouldn't be nearly as great. It would take a lot of bravado for a director to actually want to take that on. Have you heard this one? A group of poor people discover a secret conspiracy by the elite class to control the populace. While it sounds like something you'd find on the political side of Twitter, it's also the plot to John Carpenter's 1988 masterpiece, They Live. A down-on-his-luck drifter finds eerie sunglasses that reveal our society is plastered with brainwashing subliminal messages by alien invaders posing as humans. It was making a particular statement about the world then, and it just so happens to resonate now as well. What really makes this movie unique is its campy, punkish atmosphere. It's not a terribly serious film outside of the premise. Rowdy Roddy Piper was not exactly a Shakespearean actor and spends most of the movie spouting oddly hilarious one-liners.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
Keith David, a much better actor, basically spends the movie just putting up with Piper. There's also a 7-minute-long brawl between the two that doesn't advance the plot at all, but damn, is it entertaining. What would a remake even accomplish? The original still holds up today, and it's a great blend of dark humor and creepy sci-fi. It's a perpetual story that freaks us right out. Inhuman creatures who control a world that is nothing like it seems. In some ways, it's The Matrix without computers. America was largely settled by highly religious Puritans, something that still has echoes centuries later. But these early pioneers were called Puritans for a reason, and they were notoriously unbending in their zealotry. 2015's The Witch has this on full display as a family is ousted from their community due to the father's overbearing piety. After the family sets up an isolated homestead and becomes self-reliant, the cracks begin to appear as they come to believe a witch is causing them misfortune, which spirals into the various family members accusing one another of a pact with the devil. The supernatural elements are limited and aren't actually the focus of the film. Instead, it zeroes in on how the family is torn apart by uncertainty. While themes of an unseen enemy and paranoia are pervasive throughout cinema, what makes The Witch unique is how it captures its setting so thoroughly. It doesn't feel like a movie made in 2015, but a direct peek into the 1600s religious zealotry that made the Salem witch trials possible. A remake just wouldn't have anything new to bring to the table. Sure, they could change the time frame or something, but then they'd lose much of what makes the movie so scary. A family in the middle of nowhere and no one to turn to for help. Check out one of our newest videos right here, plus even more grunge videos about your favorite movies are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.